Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. Let's talk about Jarron Ennis's victory over Eimantis Stanionis. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, the fight is in my favorites folder. Enjoy it while it's online. Favorites folder on YouTube. It's an excellent fight. It's an efficient fight with contrasting styles. More importantly, it's a learning fight. Now, before I go further, I know I'm going to lose whatever friends I have in Philadelphia when I say this. But just understand, I view Jarron Ennis as beatable. He just fought a great fight, right? He won the fight. I'm not saying he didn't win, right? Stannionis' corner did not allow the fight to continue. He's bloodied. He hit the canvas. He got hit with several body shots, right? Ennis has some special skills, right? He's a sequentialist. In other words, the sixth round is beautiful. Understand, Stannionis is a big puncher, has a great jab, but like Chris Eubank, Ennis is one of those guys who is not robotic. He can see when a guy is hurt. He can see when a guy can't hit him, right? Stannionis is tipped onto his back foot. Ennis comes forward. He's throwing body shots with both hands. It's an eye-opener. The end of the fight, understand Ennis is really left-handed. He throws 3 consecutive lefts to Stannionis' body. He knows nothing is going to come back. Right? It's a high-risk move because just look at how open Ennis is at that moment. He's correctly read the room. He knows Stannionis can't pivot and throw a left hook, which Stannionis has. Right? He knows it. He closes the fight. Right? Stannionis goes down off the body shots. Think about it. A two-handed body attack. Ennis naked up top. I'm not saying Ennis isn't a spectacular talent. But what I am saying is what Sergio Mora was saying throughout the telecast. Right, folks? Mora is on point here. Ennis is high risk defensively. Ennis's defense consists of him believing that he can roll with your punches. Right, folks? He's right most of the time. But he gets hit hard some of the time. He's not defensively blessed. So let me just say, in a sport where, and I know I'm going to lose some of my crowd here, in a sport where I feel Usyk's beatable, right? I would certainly have some money on Bukoli by stoppage against Usyk, right? I would pick George Foreman to beat Usyk, right? In a sport where some slick boxers who can dodge your shots coming back, right, who can handle big punchers, right, just rolling with punches. Think Usyk, Joshua, think Usyk, Dubois, right? I'm just telling you that there's going to be a night where Jarron Ennis is just rolling with shots, like James Toney was against Roy Jones. And he's going to get fainted. The rhythm is going to change. He's going to be open. He's going to get hit. And like Toney was against Jones, he's going to get dropped. Now, let's talk about this fight. I'll get back to that. For years, there's been this ongoing dialogue in boxing. Boxing has several, right? You go to a bar, people are talking about different fighters, depending on the age and stuff like that. And it's a Mike Tyson, Prime Tyson versus Prime Ali argument. There's even an interview of Ali's trainer, who happened to be Ray Leonard's trainer, Angelo Dundee, where when asked by the interviewer who would win, Prime Tyson or Prime Ali, as you could imagine, a very biased Angelo Dundee just simply says, Tyson walked in straight lines. Right? The inference is, how could any guy who walked in straight lines beat my guy? Well, let me just say here, Stannionis walks in straight lines. Let me make another point, and this will sound even more preposterous. There's an episode of, I think it's called Reacher, where Reacher is trying to teach a guy how to fight, right? Fictional show on Prime, Amazon Prime. And Reacher tells him that punches are thrown with your legs, not with your upper body. Right? Now, let me just say, here, Stannionis clearly has the more developed upper body. Stannionis is a physical specimen. Right? He looks like if a wrestling match broke out, he looks like he'd be able to manhandle Jarron Ennis, who's taller, thinner, with relative ease. Right? The problem is that Stannionis, again, straight lines, relentlessly front foot early in this fight, and he's fighting a guy with blessed legs. Right? So just understand, Boots is forcing Stannionis to change his course. He has a guy walking in straight lines, Boots, lateral movement. Stannionis then has to pivot, change where he's going. It throws off his game. Let me say something else too. Stannionis should have de-emphasized his jab. He has a great jab. Right? The problem in this fight is he's trying to key off the jab. Folks, that doesn't work with a guy who moves as much as Boots. In other words, Stannionis needed to come into the fight, maybe fake like he's throwing the jab. Understand, you need something new. Your opponent has prepared for you, particularly at this level, unification match. Right? So what Stannionis needed to do was to take advantage of the fact that Boots doesn't have a hand up a lot of the times. He's literally just rolling with punches. So Stannionis had to throw hooks, right? Not a jab to stand up a fighter who isn't in the pocket, right? He needed to ditch the jab, and I know this is hearsay, right? Heresy, not hearsay. I know this is heresy, but Stannionis needed to come in with the idea of, I'm going to turn this into a wrestling match. I'm going to smother this guy. Right? I'm going to be throwing awkward angle, Rocky Marciano type shots to hurt this guy. I'm going to throw volume at this guy. In my members only pre-fight video, someone left a message saying, hey, the best bet on the board is that Boots is going to throw more punches than Stannionis. Right? Stannionis should have come in and said, hey, look, I'm going to throw punches with you. In other words, look, I hit hard. You're not defensively blessed. I want your title. I'm not going to give you the opportunity to maintain a cushion between us and to use my rigid timing and your more fluid footwork to keep me guessing on when I could hit you. In other words, I'm coming in the pocket whether you like it or not. Now, you've heard me here say that the Rumble in the Jungle, Foreman actually had a great strategy. Right? He's in against Ali. Understand, he gets Ali to give up his legs. Because Foreman is relentlessly aggressive. Right? Ali concludes that he has to go over by the ropes and cover up and have Foreman tire himself out. Right, folks? That's the fight Stannionis needed to fight here. Right? The way to beat Boots is to have the shootout. Right? I know it's counterintuitive. Right? But understand, I believe Boots' power comes from his legs. You've got to smother him so he can't use his legs. Right? I see a thin guy who, when his legs are in certain positions, he can hurt you. Right? I see a guy, look at the end of this fight, who is so high risk that he hits you with a right uppercut to the body. And what's his next punch? It's a left uppercut to the body. Right, folks? You know, he's naked up top. Right? You needed to jump inside. I have the same complaint of Arthur Beterbiev against Dmitry Bivol. Right? Beterbiev's fought the man for 12 rounds. Here he is in the rematch. You know, Bivol's a guy who doesn't get a lot of knockouts. When is someone going to say to him, look, man, I'm going to force you to trade. I'm going to take the extra step. You might be able to hit me on the way in. But do you hit hard enough to drop me? Because I feel I hit hard enough to drop you. I'm going to come in. I'm going to make this messy. Right? I'm going to force you to do something else other than fight on your back foot and counter me. Well, here, Stannionis is too predictable. He's too structured. Right? You know, Ennis knows he can move his legs and outmaneuver the guy. Let me say this too. I mentioned Tyson Ali. Right? I'll say this. You know, Ali leaned backward. Understand, Prime Ali knew how to lean backward. So he's hard to reach even when he's in the pocket. Folks, I'm at a loss here. And I like Ennis, right? I've pubbed Ennis in prior fights. Right? But I'm at a loss here. When I see Ennis leaning over the pocket and Stannionis isn't trying to put an elbow on his neck. Stannionis isn't in the pocket like Roberto Duran, literally roughing him up, leaning into him. Right? What's Stannionis doing? So well behaved, you know, in the pocket, not throwing with him, right? Waiting. So let me tell you about Sergio Mora, the kind of night he had. After the second round on the zone, Mora starts saying that Boots is high risk defensively. My words, Mora puts it in his words. Right? And he talks about how Stannionis is not doing enough. This is when the fight's competitive. Right? Because he sees what I see. You know, if Virgil Ortiz fights Boots, right, you hope Ortiz, who has one of the best jabs, just like Stannionis, would ditch the jab, especially since there's a weight gap between the two guys, and would run in the pocket, right, would throw power shots, would say, okay, here I am, Boots. Right? Let's trade because I've looked on film and your head is unprotected a lot of the time. right? On the way into the pocket, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Boozy Ennis, in Boots' corner, tells his son, keep throwing the jab, basically, right? Boots has a pretty good jab. It's a mobile jab. My point to you is you've got to be prepared to get marked up against this level of opponent. Because understand, if you don't bum rush the pocket, you're going to get methodically beaten up. This is a boxer puncher. Right? So you have to use roughhouse tactics. Now let me just say that boxing is a game of inches. It really is. Right? Stannionis is sudden. Stannionis, you'd be shocked, lands some flush hooks. Right? But he couldn't knock Boots down. My point to you is, why did he go back to the jab? Shouldn't he have just been rough and tumble? You're fighting Boots in Philly. The chances of winning by decision, let's say, aren't that great. Right? You understand, I know Stanionis was unbeaten going into this fight, but you understand Boots is unbeaten too. If you're fighting a guy who's high risk defensively, and let me just say, this is not Canelo. Right? Canelo, short neck. He knows how to have a hand up. He too rolls with punches, but you notice he has himself protected. He's shorter. There's less to hit. Right? Canelo's defensively blessed. Here I see Boots getting hit with shots. So let me just say that at one point, Mora says the line of the night. He says that Stannionis is either, his words, blocking or jabbing. Right? This isn't a fight where his path to victory would be to roughhouse Boots. Just like if I'm going to fight Alexander Usyk, I don't want a boxing match to break out. Boxing, I'm in trouble. Right? Here's Ennis, mostly left-handed. He does go right-handed for stretches, but he's mostly left-handed. Right? Usyk, southpaw, he's a slick southpaw. He's hard to find, right? Tony Bellew said that, if you let if you let Usyk move around the ring, you'll never find him. Right? If I'm fighting that kind of fighter, my attitude has to be, look, man, this is a shootout. Right? I'm not going to lose by being out-jabbed. Right, player, I'm not even here to throw a lot of jabs. I'm here to go hunting. Right? When you hear Mora say that Stannionis is either blocking or jabbing, that means he's not landing power shots. Right? Let me say this too. I believe what Mora is discussing here is the blueprint on how to beat Jaron Ennis. Right, folks? It's a Martin Bacoli blueprint. It's a George Foreman blueprint. Right? You have to be prepared to trade. You have to be prepared to take away his legs. You have to pursue him, but you have to be prepared to knock down his jab and jump in the pocket. Right? I want people, I've posted a link to it in an earlier video, I want people to look at Roberto Duran fighting a then unbeaten Ray Leonard and jumping in the pocket repeatedly. Right? He understood you don't beat Ray Leonard by letting Ray establish a jab and move around the ring. If Ray's moving around the ring, you're losing the fight. Right? You've got to bring the fight to the guy. In shootouts, you're going to get hit with major shots. Right? Foreman, Ron Lyle, Foreman hits the canvas twice. Right? That's the attitude Stanionis should have. That's the attitude any opponent of Jarron Ennis should have, right? The Karen guy goes the distance against Ennis twice, right? But you didn't get the feeling Ennis was losing either of those fights. You need the next step. The guy who is prepared to push the issue, where he's in there for a stoppage, right? I'm assuming if Martin Bakole fought Alexander Usyk, Bakole would be all in trying to get a stoppage, right? I'm assuming if Fabio Wardley were to eventually fight Alexander Usyk, Wardley would understand he has to turn this into a street fight. That's what Stannionis needed to do. Instead, Stannionis engaged in a boxing match, and it was sad because you saw him land some great shots, but then he didn't come back. Jump in the pocket. Be mean-spirited. Right? Understand, too, Stannionis, excellent body puncher. Right? Ennis, tall guy, leaning over the pocket. When Stannionis lands a hook up top, why didn't he get low, get in the pocket, just start ripping Ennis's body? Look, I'm not saying it's easy. I know it's not easy. I know Ennis is immensely talented. Right? But understand, if your goal is to outbox Ennis, I believe you're already on the way to defeat. Let me say, too, that Stannionis in the fifth round, and he has a good fifth round, until, let's say, the last 40 seconds or so. Right? But in the fifth round, too much lateral movement. Right? If you're not a lateral movement guy and you're in against Mr. Lateral Movement, Jarron Ennis, right, then don't you need to just abandon the lateral movement and just chase after the guy? Why are you even reading Ennis's feints? Right? You should just be front foot heavy. Right? Understand, Stannionis' game, Stannionis is an accomplished boxer. But it works better against guys fighting at his tempo, who don't move as much as Jarron Ennis does. Right? Let me say this too, and I thought it was interesting. In the third round, Stannionis knocks down Boots with a right hook, or so it seemed, right? But the ref was on it. The ref was correct. What actually happened is Stannionis throws the punch. Boots ducks under it, right? Leans. Boots is leaning forward that much. Look at their heads. Boots, who's taller, is looking at Stannionis. He's giving away that much height. Right? So Stannionis throws the punch. Boots ducks under it. Stannionis' punch hooks Boots and pushes him down to the canvas. Now the referee, I don't know his name, but this was the ref who did the masterful job in a Jay Opataya fight, where Opataya got an early stoppage. Right? This ref figured it out immediately, did not call it a knockdown. My point to you is simply this. If you're Stannionis at that moment, don't you think to yourself, wow, Boots is leaning too much in the pocket. Why don't I try to throw a similar punch, but this time have the other hand ready to hit him as he ducks into the pocket? Right? We didn't get that. Understand, the fight ends just a few rounds later. Right? But somebody watching the film of this fight needs to keep an eye on Boots' head placement, particularly at that moment. Right? If you know the taller fighter is going to have his head right here, Don't you work things out so you have a short punch that only has to travel about this far to hit him in the head as he leans too aggressively over the pocket? Right? Let me say this too. Fourth round, Boots switches to orthodox. Right now, I know there are trainers in the sport, Ben Davison, for example, who don't like switchers. Right? If you're Stannionis, why don't you attack at that moment? I know it's a whole new set of angles, but why isn't your thought process, I've been hit with Boots' left hand, I know that's his dominant hand. Now he has that hand up front. What's he going to hit me with? A left hook off that? Right? Why don't I guard against the left hook and just bum rush the pocket? Right? I'm already getting outboxed. Now the guy is switching hands. Right? Isn't this the moment where you just put your head down and you start throwing punches? When in this fight would Joe Frazier decide he's just going to come inside and let his hands rip? I guarantee you Joe Frazier's not going to stand there and watch you dance around. Right? So let me just say, Stannionis had his chances here. Right? Boots is the best at 147. Right? He's a pound for pound level talent. But understand, like so many great athletes, he takes chances. Right? That closing sequence, I'm still amazed. Where, Stanionis starts backing up, Boots comes in, Boots assumes this is not a trap. Boots assumes he can throw both hands to Stanionis' body. What if it were a trap? What if Stannionis took a couple of steps back? Then Boots comes in, drops his hands to throw body shots, and then Stannionis has that right hand come right down Main Street. It didn't happen in this fight. Folks, the next fighter is looking at the film and is thinking about creating moments like that. Right? If I'm Boots, his defense is so high risk, I would wait out Virgil Ortiz. I think Ortiz is too dangerous for Boots. I'm hearing Ortiz is having a problem making weight at 154. I would wait for Ortiz to leave 154, right? Folks, it's prize fighting. I want to get paid. I would wait for Ortiz to leave 154. Then, if I'm ready, I would jump to 154, right? I think Tim Tszew's beatable. I think Sebastian Fundora is beatable, right? How few fights. Here, by the way, literally, Stannionis has one fight, 7 rounds, or something like that, in the last 3 years, right? You'd be able to catch Keith Thurman, and Thurman's advanced. I'm not here to say different, right? But you'd be able to catch Keith Thurman, let's say, when he's a little bit rusty, right? How many rounds did his last fight go? When was his fight before that one? Right? But I'd have to be honest with myself. If I'm Boots Ennis, he's fortunate that he dodged the fight with Virgil Ortiz. Right? And if I'm Ortiz, right, even though I have one of boxing's best jabs, my strategy would be to get deep in the pocket, to fight tight, because Ennis, of course, is fighting loose, right? This is the tall guy leaning over the pocket, rolling with punches and stuff like that. I would come in, fight small, with a heavy onslaught of power shots, right? Boots, as they point out on the telecast here on the Zone, looked rail thin at the weigh-in and had to rehydrate after the weigh-in. Folks, in the fight, looking at his upper body, he looks thin, right? This is the tall guy at 147. Right? A slugger needs to think to himself, gee, I'm fighting a guy who yo-yos in weight like this. If I can force him to put his feet together Where's he going to get his power from? If I hit his torso enough and he hits mine, who's going to get hurt more? Him or me? Right? You look at Stannionis' upper body, it's chiseled. Right? Stannionis should have made a decision to have a shootout. Right? To be George Foreman. Even if it gets him on the canvas. Right? He needed to say, hey, this is going to be rough and tumble. Right? Because this guy's defense leaves his head open. Right? The secret to Roy Jones, other than that he's a freak athlete with incredible hand speed, is that Jones would feint you out of your shoes. James Toney slipped punches like Boots Ennis. Right? Boots Ennis is James Toney with legs. Right? Understand what Jones does to land the big punch in that fight. Jones pretended he was one of his chickens. I'm not making this up. He's still with us. The press can ask him now, right? He pretends he's one of his chickens and raised his hands up, kind of like Kung Fu style. Then as Toney watched him and got lulled into what Jones was doing, Jones then hits him with a hook. And Toney then backs up, ends up falling into the ropes. Right? Those are the kind of tactics that fighters need to do. Right? Just understand, here you have a champion who's a master boxer, who's a great sequentialist, who's a high-risk poker player. Right? This is the guy who comes in again, is throwing back-to-back uppercuts. Right? The lead is a right hand, then he throws 3 left uppercuts. Right? This is the risk taker. Make him pay for the risk. If you know his head is going to be unprotected for parts of the round, there should be double and triple feints. Right? Have him slip the punch you haven't thrown. Then as he brings his head back, that's when you hit him. And then stay deep in the pocket. Riddle his body. I've never figured out why people fight tall guys, like tall, slender guys, like Deontay Wilder, and don't get inside round after round, ripping the guy's body. That's the kind of fight an opponent has to fight against a Boots Ennis. I congratulate Boots. I did have money on Stannionis by stoppage. I did have a hedge of Ennis by KO. But just understand, it was there for him. Right? Watch the fight closely. You're going to see that Stannionis lands a fair share of hooks. Right? The problem is he's distracted by his own jab. In other words, Stannionis' jab didn't stop Ennis. It stopped him. Right? You can't be patient and, just try to jab your way in and then hope that the stars align and you have an opportunity to hit Boots Ennis. No, you have to make the opportunity with an aggressive front foot. Right? Duran had a choice in the first Ray Leonard fight. He could watch Ray move around the ring and shoot a jab, or he can disrupt Ray. Jump in the pocket. Throw the kitchen sink at him, including elbows, including grabbing. Duran picked the latter. Gave Ray Leonard his first loss. Stannionis had this fight on the table. Was too measured. Was too front foot. Was too predictable. Right? Didn't, turn this into the roughhouse type of fight that he needed to. Right? People remember Floyd Mayweather, late in his career, fights Marcus Maidana. And there's a breathtaking moment in their first fight where Maidana gets Mayweather over by the ropes, right? And you thought, finally, a guy is actually going to try to roughhouse Mayweather. Unfortunately, Mayweather was at the stage of his career where he knew how to operate. off the ropes, and Maidana was a bit limited, right? He wasn't, the polished boxer who, knew exactly how to exploit the situation, right? But understand, somebody needs to get Ennis on the ropes and needs to keep him there. That wasn't Stanionis. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video if you feel I've been unfair to Jarron Ennis. And I think Jarron Ennis is an elite talent, just like I think Usyk is an elite talent. But like Usyk, I feel Stannionis can be beaten. Those are my, excuse me, we know Stannionis can be beaten now. I think Ennis can be beaten. Those are my thoughts. I look forward to yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Listen to Mora. That's an A+ boxing commentary job. Thanks for stopping by.